Hello, I'm Rob Jones, and joining me is Jason English, CEO of our Laith. Jason is one of our shortlisted candidates for the Construction Technology Leader category of the 2021 Construction Technology Awards. The awards celebrate new approaches and best-in-class use of technology within the built environment. In this category, we've shortlisted the leaders who have successfully led the planning, adoption, or use of digital technology in the built environment. The winner will be announced on the 2nd of June during the Construction Technology Festival in Dubai. Now, Jason, you became CEO of our Laith in February 2020, just as people were really becoming aware of COVID-19 and the health impact of this pandemic, of this illness. This could be seen as unfortunate timing, but has the pandemic also presented an unexpected opportunity to drive the changes you wanted to make through more quickly?
Yeah, so hi, Rob, and thank you for having me. So essentially, yeah, I mean, obviously, besides arriving at probably one of the worst times in history, you know, if a CEO ever wants to make changes, he had the perfect platform to be able to make those changes when COVID arrived. Traditionally, our Laith was not necessarily a digitally transformed business. And I guess, you know, having that initiative in mind right from the onset, coming in and having COVID come just really helped me be able to create the digital transformation that was required. So I guess the long and the short is, yes, it created a good opportunity for me to be able to come in. And I think a lot of people were looking for direction at that time. And, you know, having COVID as a basis to be able to make those changes, it did make everything much easier.
So how did you convince people that the changes you wanted to make were the right changes, and what sort of processes did you put in place?
So the irony is that on day one that I started, which was the 1st of February 2020, I actually had a video, I had a live session, but I put up a video and I'd created a vision for the business. So I had a team that put out, you know, the future of our Laith together with VR and AR and all the sort of digital transformation steps that I wanted to take. And I painted the picture of what we were going to look like in a couple of years from now, and knowing that this would be a slow journey of transition. And I guess, you know, when COVID hit, everything that I'd spoken about on day one, sort of, it just made sense. And I think the adoption actually became really easy, and people just bought into the vision much quicker, ultimately.
And are there certain digital technologies that are already starting to come to the fore?
Yeah, so I mean, look, we've, you know, sure, we did quite a lot, right? All the way from building out, you know, our business was very much an admin-heavy business. So the first thing we wanted to do was try and streamline. So we implemented a number of apps, processes around simple things. So leave forms, petty cash payments. We were dealing with a lot of petty cash around the GCC regions, try to optimize that. So we started rolling them out. Safety management walks. We immediately created applications. Instead of the safety teams having to come back in the office and do all the updates in the offices, they were doing it live in the field, sending live photos to all the managers' email addresses. So, you know, there were so many factors that happened, but that was one on the app side. One of my initiatives was I wanted to have, you know, create this gamification in terms of having a mascot. I always believe in having some sort of gamified version of a mascot for a business. And we immediately started to roll that out. Ironically, when COVID broke, our mascot had just been sort of rolled out, so we could start utilizing, which was a lion mascot, as a tool to communicate in multiple languages and just be able to have, you know, that sense of community feel. There were other initiatives that we were looking at where even before COVID broke, which I wanted to create a virtual studio. And again, that virtual studio was sort of a 12-month transition window. And immediately we started when COVID broke, we created the digital studio. We knew that it would be required. We were actually doing it for videos and for all sorts of internal things. And that became a useful tool for us to start talking to some of our clients on those platforms. There was obviously Zoom. The whole world zoomed in all of a sudden and started to become remote. And a lot of the things we had started to speak about or had been speaking about in terms of, we were fortunate. We converted our business to Google back in 2016 across the group, but not our Laith. And so when I came in, the first thing was to really transition everything onto Google for Business so that we could go remote and have, direct communications. Things like Zoom was just part of that transition. And so immediately with COVID, it helped roll those things out and made them a lot simpler. We started to create more virtual visualizations and representations of the jobs we did. A lot of it was 2D CAD driven. It was traditional engineering. We really took that to the next level with 3-dimensional. All of these sort of really helped the process because you had to now convey your story online. You couldn't physically talk to people in offices anymore. And so this whole visualization of what we were doing became that much more prevalent. We obviously also started to search internally at, what are we going to do? A large part of our business is construction and events, both of which are literally at a standstill. And how do we move forward from there? And I guess, one of the things we said was we own a whole lot of assets. We have a lot of project management and construction capability. Why don't we build our own infrastructure? And so we pivoted. We used our engineering house to design, render. Those renders could then be produced with, in this case, Dubai Tourism, who then got us on board with other companies. And we ended up building Dubai's latest iconic adventure park, which we now self-own. And that would have never happened had COVID not come along. It just wouldn't have been at the forefront of us trying to find those exponential changes that we needed. And there was a whole, even IoT, we wanted to know more about our usage of our equipment with our customers and how they were using it and how we could help them better and what they were doing because we couldn't get out to sites. And so the deployment of IoT into our big, what we call the yellow metal equipment really helped us because we could monitor remotely what clients were doing, how they were utilizing, could manage our field technicians better. So yeah, there were so many things that happened. I couldn't pick one and I couldn't say like it was just this transition that happened really quickly and COVID did help that.
And it sounds like ideas like creating a studio, actually, that's quite a clever idea. When you're thinking about how am I going to communicate with my clients differently to show them, what our thinking is or what our plans are, how things are evolving. That's quite different.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was also a case of, coming in fresh to a market industry. Laith has been in the industry 25 years. So it had a really long life cycle of clients. Coming in, I don't think there was many new people starting to establish themselves in Dubai in COVID. So really, for me, it was a way to also engage with clients and just meet them in a different way. We couldn't go to offices, we couldn't do that. But if I could bring them into a talk show environment, so to speak, I could then start to actually engage with them in different ways, and they could hear a bit about me, and I could hear a bit about them in a light-hearted but a cool way, I guess.
Okay. So you mentioned one of the projects. You mentioned the theme park. Did you say?
Yeah, it's called the Arch Experience.
Okay. Are there any other projects that you've worked on where you've started to really use digital technologies that you're quite proud of that are ongoing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's almost become a norm now, to be quite honest. So the expectation shifted from, what was a once-off to now it's sort of inherently embedded into the way we do things in our systems. But, everything from testing products. So, historically you would have built a product, you would have tested it out, you would have had a look at it in physical reality. I think what we did was we started to render out a lot of the information, a lot of the test products. So one is a snooze pod. So this is sort of a temporary hotel pod. We realized that, access to hotels and these types of things is becoming more difficult. And on remote construction sites, people are going to need places to sleep. So we rendered out this and modeled it. We could then do squad reviews, actually walking through the new pod, and actually commenting and having that interaction, which historically we would have gone out into yards, we would have built, we would have walked in and out, we would have commented, we would have come back. And actually the process allowed us to build much quicker and reinvent much quicker. So there was a lot of positives in that domain. We've also used a lot of, one of the things that we really tried to do was how do we train? Because to scale a business, you need to be able to, what I call deploy my OROS. But you need to be able to transfer your ideas, your knowledge, your beliefs to the people that that are coming on board. And whilst COVID was happening, a lot of people were furloughing, letting go of people. We were actually hiring new people.
So that's one of the questions I was going to ask you actually, is what sort of skills do you think people have learned from you, which you're kind of beginning to touch on there?
I don't know. I guess maybe swim upriver. I'm not sure it's always the wisest skill to have. But certainly, if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you're gonna end up with the same results. And I think that's the one thing that I keep telling our team. You don't need to be afraid. I think the biggest lesson that everyone would have learned from me is you don't reduce costs to save money. You reduce costs only if it's going to add to efficiency. And so, I'd rather deploy more money to improve efficiency than I would to cut costs, if that makes sense. So there's always this misalignment between the two. And I think that's the one thing I've tried to push my people to think about. How do I rather make the best use of the capital that's available to enhance what we do, rather than how do I find corners to cut, even in a COVID time. And so I'd probably say that's the biggest leadership lesson that I would hope they would take away. And also, don't be afraid of change. It's not scary. It's overwhelming, but if you manage it correctly, you can get it done.
I'm interested to see how you started with this. So you obviously now are CEO of Laith, but were you always interested at the start of your career, for instance, in the use of technology, how technology could change processes, improve, for instance, processes in the built environment, etc.?
So I think when I started out, which was in the oil and gas sector, that answer probably was no. I was just a young engineer, graduated, that was just really running around and having a bit of fun. But I think what happened was, as I learned more and more, I started to realize that there's a lot of manual things that we do that could be improved. And so right from early days, I remember building databases myself. I certainly hadn't studied any form of computer coding or language, but I would spend hours in the evening just trying to learn, and not because I wanted to build a database I could sell, but because I wanted to build the database that would make my life easier. And so I actually built out quite a nice database back then. And that sort of continued throughout my career in different stages. We were working at one stage out in Russia, in very remote locations where access to good skill sets was really challenging. Language was a huge issue. And one of the ways that we could overcome that was obviously taking training online and converting it into multiple languages. And so even back then, we were already starting to look at that and create the visual representation, as opposed to what a lot of people do, which is write a 100-page procedure that goes into a drawer and nobody reads. I have this theory that if you can't write a procedure and fit it on one page, it's too long because people won't look at it. So, try and create a visualized procedure rather than a written procedure. And that then talks to multiple languages. So all those have kept going. And I think the real step change was when I left my corporate job and started my own business. I had to compete against the giant. There were 64,000 employees. I was a 3-man band show. And literally, I wanted to compete in the same space. And the only way I was going to do that was to get a lot of people very quickly trained in the way I wanted to do things and at scale. And the only way I could do that was create digital visualizations of everything that was in my head, and the way that you had to physically execute method statements on site, risk analysis, etc. Visualize that, and then I could train that on the cloud. And so we were already doing that back in 2014, 15, 16. And so that from there, I would say that I've been really consistently focused on innovating businesses, and have joined many institutions in Silicon Valley and various groups across the world that have really then helped catapult that, I guess, into a higher level.
So that's very interesting, actually, that you started looking quite early on in terms of how you could use technology to get a message across. And of course, now what we're starting to see increasingly is people talking in construction about how to use digital technologies to improve processes, improve safety, make just some of the back end things that have to be done, some of the stuff easier and run simpler and faster. Are you starting to see digitalization of technologies as an advantage when you're going into a tender?
Yeah, so look, I think the gap between maybe past and today is slightly different. If you asked me this question 12 months ago, I would have said absolutely, it's a huge advantage. I think now what you're finding is those that, there's two types of businesses that are coming out of this, those that have survived and those that are dead. And the ones that have survived have probably survived on the basis that they've pivoted in some way through some digital association. So, but we do still see it. We have, we keep trying to push the envelope. So what we've now done is, where it was just visual representations, we've taken it to the next level is how do we create the experiential sort of experience for our clients that we're bidding to. So, where it might have started off in the old days with a tender pack and a couple of 2D drawings, then maybe it moved into some 3D renders and sort of showing, the 3D model of it. And then sort of it moved into the visualized renders, which has got nice skins and aesthetics. And we've now taken it a step further where we've actually built a computer game. And so we've taken all of our construction projects, put them into a computer game, and we can now take them in as, let's call it characters within the game, walk around and actually look at the project. And so these are just, this is continuously evolving. The problem is that what we're finding is it's really hard to demonstrate these when you're doing a tender submission, if you can't have a video tender submission, if that makes sense. So I think that'll be an interesting play to see how the whole concept of tenders changes over time, because it'll be less about paperwork and it'll be more about telling the story and getting the visualization across about what you're going to build, how you're going to build it, and what your sort of your benefits are over using somebody else. So
that's really interesting, actually. So at the moment you're talking about, I guess, a 3D effect video game, and the next stage from that is probably what, virtual reality, and maybe then on from that, augmented or mixed reality, where maybe they're going to the site and they can walk around and see how it's going to look for the future.
Yeah. You're 100% right. And I think, look, we play in the VR. We've built a lot of VR stuff. We use VR for training. We use AR for interpreting drawings. So we've done some really cool stuff, but the problem is that I think it still lacks momentum. VR by nature is quite tough. You've got to get headsets to everybody. It's complicated. If people have not sat in that world, it still makes you dizzy. But there's no doubt that transition will happen as technology improves, as 5G comes, and you're going to start to see a massive rollout of those, and same with AR and holographic images. And so you're right. But I think right now we've sort of said the stage now is the 3D experience, physical 3D experience in a virtual world. But the next thing will definitely be a combination of AR and VR technologies.
So that must mean that you're definitely seeing attitudes change towards construction, different types of construction technology now. People are really beginning to embrace and actually see the benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's like anything that changes, not even the technology, right? But there's always there's the early adopters, right? There's the guys that drink all the Kool-Aid and they sort of ramp up and they go heavy into it. And then they realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't have gone so heavy, and they taper back a bit. And there's sort of the realization of, okay, let's try and understand it. It's not going to be as useful. The world's not ready for it just yet. But then it sort of hits that second trough and then starts to climb. And I think when it gets to that point, you start to see a lot of the adopters coming on board. And I think with technology now in the construction sector, we're very much there. Drones are becoming more and more familiar. We use drones for a lot of the visual, for capturing the data to create visual representations of what we want to do. And that was really tough earlier on. Regulations are still trying to be a change. People are still trying to understand all the landscapes and the training of pilots, et cetera, et cetera. So as it sort of shifts, people become more familiar, they become more comfortable, change is less scary. And so people start to adopt it more, and there's more scale. And, if I go and I just pitch a video game to a client, he's going to think I'm crazy. But if three of us go and pitch a video game to a client, he might be saying, maybe I need to start looking at how video games can actually help me in my business as a client.
So final question then. If we look forward a couple of years, just 2 or 3 years, are there particular parts of are there particular technologies which we're beginning to see now come through, that people are now beginning to slowly use, that you think will start to become prevalent, that will become essential?
It depends on where you sit in the scale of what's being used and what's not being used at the moment. I would probably say that I think in the next, over the next 5 years, what is going to be common? I think you're going to see remote planning being a really critical part. So, and when I mean remote planning, I'm talking about visualized remote planning, not sitting on a computer doing Primavera or Artemis or any of these planning programs, but actually be able to build the product remotely from different locations with different resources and see it modeled. So I think that's one thing you're going to see. We call it VLP, visualized logistical planning. Then you're going to start to see, I think drones is going to become a norm, right? So drones will be taking imagery of the groundworks, they'll be surveying. I think you're going to see project progress being tracked by drones. And then asset tracking, all this IoT stuff. So whether it's IoT cameras, whether it's IoT tracking systems into, again, yellow metal equipment or just into general expensive items around plants, you're going to start to see that because the cost of GPS tracking and GSM tracking is coming down at scale. I mean, you can put a IoT camera live on a site now for 1,000 dirhams. In the past, it used to cost you 50,000 dirhams. So, and I think you're going to see a lot of apps that are coming out that are going to be helping, especially field reporting, so that people can literally just click and play. Tablets are becoming smarter even in high explosive zones. So they're being able to be utilized in traditional places that you couldn't really, or you could, but at a really high cost. And so you're seeing the democratization of all these technologies that are actually becoming more affordable and mainstream to use day to day on every project site. And so I'd say that those are the key ones. And of course, the whole 3D modeling is going to continue to evolve into this experiential VR, AR, holographic sort of experience. So that would be my view.
Jason, thank you very much for your time and good luck with your shortlist in the Construction Technology Leader Award.
No, thank you. And thank you very much for having me.